I want to talk about real quick what discs are all about. What I have here is a healthy disc. Let's kind of study it in detail so we can see what it is we're talking about. A healthy disc is really made out of just two parts. The nucleus, which is what sits in the middle, and the rest of the disc, which is what we call these little annular fibers. All they do, and their only job, and they're very strong enough to basically be intact for most of our lives, but not strong enough to be intact forever, unfortunately. The only thing they do is hold the nucleus in the middle. That's all they do. As long as that's the case, we're not going to have a problem. But there's something that tends to happen. Does that look the same as the other disc?
No.
No. What happened here? The annular fibers that we just talked about, that holds the nucleus in place, they herniate. You guys heard of the term herniated disc?
Yes.
You guys ever heard of bulging disc? Okay, we're going to talk about what a bulging disc is all about in a second. When these fibers herniate, the nucleus does not stay in the middle anymore. It actually goes off to the side. Now, very important to understand, anybody ever seen a tire with not enough air in it? Mm-hmm. What happens to the sidewalls? They balloon out, don't they, right? Okay, and also if you look at a tire that's going flat, the rim and the ground don't have much of a distance between them. It's important to note this because usually people with disc problems wind up going to an orthopedic surgeon or to their medical doctor, whatever that happens. Usually what is the next step that takes place right after you go to a doctor for, let's say you're having sciatica, shooting down the back of your leg. You're at your general practitioner's office. He orders an MRI, correct? Okay. MRIs, don't get me wrong, MRIs are great, but there's a problem with MRIs. Don't they take them lying down?
Yes.
Is the disc behaving the same way with gravity going through it as opposed to a disc that's has no gravity going through it? Any more than a tire in a car that's being lifted up in the air versus one that's got its full weight on the car. And that's precisely why this stuff is made out of fluid. As long as it's contained from all sides, it will actually hold you up. It's very important to understand exactly how a disc works. I'm going to kind of do an illustration of what a disc looks like if you were to slice it in half. If we have a vertebra right here, and we have another vertebra sitting on top of it, and we had a disc sitting right there, the nucleus would be the ball sitting right in the middle. What holds it there are these things we call annular fibers. Very strong, as we talked about. As long as this is the case, we have several things we can count on. The first thing we want to look at is the fact that as long as this is where it's supposed to be, the two bones sitting on top and below that disc are going to be parallel. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So what's going to happen if I were to tear some of these fibers? Remember, a cat and a dog and a horse, it's really not as much of an issue. The cat winds up with one bad disc. But on us, it's a major, major, gigantic issue because remember, gravity is squeezing here. This is made out of fluid. What do you think is going to happen? If I were to take a toothpaste tube and squeeze it, and you come along and take the cap off, what's going to happen? That's exactly what happens. Remember, we're humans, so our toothpaste tube is always being squeezed. I'm standing here, I'm squeezing every one of my discs. You guys are sitting there, you're squeezing every one of your discs. Now we've lost containment. What's going to happen is this stuff is going to go off to the side. Very important to understand that the only weight-bearing portion of your disc, the main weight-bearing portion of your disc, is the nucleus. So now that I've shoved it off to the side, obviously there's a finite amount of material. This stuff winds up collapsing a little bit. Are we still going to have symmetry in this situation? The answer is obviously no. This is what happens. I'm going to kind of reconfigure this as to what it winds up really looking like in us humans. Then we're going to have a problem. Okay. I want to illustrate, if I were to take what's happening to this disc and assume that it's, let's say, here somewhere. And I'm going to do to this what is happening to that bone. Look what happens to the rest of the spine. Does that look good?
No.
Now, the question becomes, why is it then, with all these people with bad discs, none of them walk down the streets like this? That would be the first thing I would wonder, okay? Usually people with bad discs, they come in, not all the time. If the disc injury is relatively new, they will come down like this. We call this an antalgic lean. If I see somebody walking through the front door like this, I know exactly what's going on. I also know when this happened. It's probably something happened in the last few days. Because if that person were to go home and do nothing about it, within a week they're going to look like this again. And that is usually misinterpreted as, I got okay. Well, that's not what happened. This is what happened. When you have something like this, your body will not leave it alone. It will try to adapt, or what we said, compensate for this problem. It will actually create its own misalignment here to try and bring your center of gravity back where it's supposed to be. And as if this is not enough, because it's not, because the rest of them still doesn't look good, the shoulders have to be level, and it'll create another misalignment here to compensate. You're going to look like this. Now, it's not really confusing for me that every time I take a picture of a person who's had an injury, I wind up seeing something like this. But they're usually very surprised to see this, because they look at themselves. The head looks good, the shoulder looks level, the pelvis looks pretty good. There's a problem with this. Okay, let's talk about why this is a problem. Not only do we have a disc problem here, but we have what we call compensatory misalignments.